Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani, and today we're going to talk about different family roles when you have narcissistic parents, namely the scapegoat, the golden child, and the invisible child. Again, a reminder, if you haven't already, please hit the bell, subscribe to this channel because you'll get new content twice a week and you will become the expert on all things narcissistic. So let's talk a little bit about the narcissistic family system, and specifically some of these roles of children in those systems. No matter what, having a narcissistic parent is not good for your psychological development. The research is sort of interesting on this because what many clinicians will tell you is that it really only takes one good parent to protect a child, but that parent has to protect the child. So in other words, you may have a sweet mom, but if she really let your narcissistic father have a go at you and really give you a hard time, that's not what I mean. It's really that parent who talks to you, sits you down, lets you know this isn't your fault. And most people in narcissistic family systems didn't get that kind of protection. You may also have two narcissistic parents, then all bets are off. So let's talk about these roles. Let's first talk about the scapegoat. Those of you who were the scapegoat in your family system, you know exactly what that role is. Scapegoat is just what it sounds like. It's the person who gets the pile-on, who gets the blame, who experiences sometimes what's called family mobbing, where literally the whole family system may gang up against them. People become scapegoats in a family system for a variety of reasons. At one end, it may very well be because that scapegoat is a threat. They're better, they're more serene, they're more psychologically intact, they're smarter, they're more skilled, or at some level, this is what I'm convinced of, the scapegoat gets it. It's almost like from a very young age, the scapegoat's got everyone's number in that family system, and they get it, and the adults in the system know that they get it, and so they'll often try to isolate them. And that's exactly what does happen to the scapegoat. They either get entirely isolated, or they get criticized, and more often than it's both. So a scapegoated child gets very confused, because as you can imagine, in essence, their entire life, their entire developmental history is characterized by being gaslighted. They can't get a straight answer. They're constantly being manipulated and emotionally abused. But more than anything, they're blamed for things they have nothing to do with, which can be absolutely crazy-making for a child. It would be crazy-making for an adult, and a child can easily get confused. As you can see, a person who's scapegoated in a family system can go into adulthood feeling deeply alienated, suffering a loss of self-esteem, suffering a real sense of grief because they don't have a sense of belonging, have a really difficult time negotiating adult relationships. And probably the best thing we can hope for with the scapegoat is that through therapy or other guidance, they see that they were in fact scapegoated, and that becomes a wake-up call to set up some really firm and permanent boundaries with their family system. To be a scapegoated child is awful, and at some level it can be to the point of abuse what a scapegoated child can experience, that they may actually take on the burden of the abuse of everyone in the family, of what every child in that family was to experience, may end up falling all entirely on that one child. Now let's talk about the golden child, almost the opposite role to what the scapegoated child experiences. The golden child is exactly what it sounds like, the crown prince or the crown princess of a family. They're often anointed with that role of the golden child because they bring glory onto the family. They're often very good at something, like especially something that the parent values. They're a great athlete. They're a beauty queen. They're a brilliant student. Something about them brings goodwill onto them from the rest of the world, which elevates the narcissistic parent or parents' sort of grandiosity, so they want to sort of stay in that child's good graces. The golden child will receive more attention, more compliments, more resource. They might get the bigger bedroom. There'll be the bigger pictures of them on the mantle at home. It's pretty clear who they are. The golden child was sort of like a nascent or a hidden narcissist, sort of in the making. They may actually think they deserve all this adulation and celebrate that role, and in fact may be a real participant in scapegoating a scapegoated sibling. However, in some cases, it's really, really challenging for the golden child, especially if they have siblings. They may sometimes feel a sense of survivor guilt. They may appreciate the fact that they're somehow protected or getting this adulation. Any child would. Children love praise. But in the same breath, they're able to see that their other siblings are not only not getting nearly as much, some of their siblings may be suffering. There also may be a pressure on the golden child that in some ways it almost feels like they're the only one who can reason or talk to or get to the narcissistic parent. The golden child actually can sometimes have their balloon popped, because if the golden child almost gets too big for their britches and really tries to have a meaningful conversation with the narcissistic parent or tries to hold the narcissistic parent accountable, just like all narcissists when they're held accountable, they don't like that. And the golden child can sometimes experience a fall from grace. Golden children may actually grow up and go on to be rather successful adults. And that's where it gets very interesting. Because in a family system, many times that golden child will carry the guilt or the burden of having to either take care of or deal with the narcissistic parent, even as the other siblings may have faded away, not wanting to deal with this person anymore. So there can sometimes be a long-term burden with this golden child role. At another level, the golden child may also feel like they can't deliver on all the big hopes that were put on them as the so-called crown prince. And because of that, that can often set a golden child up for failure as an adult. The golden child may also not want to continue doing the thing that brought them all that adulation from their parents. So that golden child who got there from being a really great basketball player may go into adulthood and say, yo, I'm not interested in playing basketball anymore. I'm not interested in doing ballet anymore. I'm not interested in doing whatever it was that brought them all the glory. And what they will then see is how conditional the relationship was with that narcissistic parent. As a golden child goes into adulthood, it's also not unusual that their narcissistic parent may actually get competitive with them. It's one thing when the person was a child and bringing glory to the parent and the family. It was quite another when that narcissistic parent, who's now older, may actually feel that their day in the sun is done, but their golden child, now golden adult's, day in the sun is just beginning. That level of competitiveness can actually be rather uncomfortable for someone in that role. But it's a complicated role, and it can definitely be a setup not only for potentially becoming a narcissist as an adult, but also for feeling like, I don't want this role, and there's a lot of expectations heaped onto it. So what about our third child, the invisible child? Those of you who identify with that role know exactly what it is. This is the poor child that actually fades into the woodwork. It's different than the scapegoat. The scapegoated child really experiences actively people going at them, blaming them, physically, emotionally, or otherwise abusing them. The scapegoat really sort of takes a hit. The invisible child experiences what we call neglect. They get forgotten in the whole issue. Now, one person might think, well, that's great. You're avoiding the narcissistic parent's wrath. Perhaps. But a child is a bit like a garden. It does need to be cultivated. It needs to be noticed. It needs to be taken care of. It needs to be tended. And so when that child doesn't get that, they literally fade to the background. Remember, being a narcissist is terrible for being a parent. Because narcissists are so self-serving, they're so selfish, and they have such a tendency to view other people as conveniences or inconveniences, that when you're useful to a narcissist, they're all about you. But when you're not, and many times a child can be, sadly, an inconvenience, they want stuff and they need you to do stuff. That's the nature of parenting. But the narcissist may find that child to be a headache. And that child can easily sort of fade into the background for that narcissistic parent or for the person's narcissistic parents. The challenge of this is that the invisible child, like any child, will often spend time trying to get the notice of their parents. They'll do anything they can. They'll try to be the best possible kid. They'll try to be more than enough, whether it's getting grades or staying out of trouble, or sometimes getting into trouble, just so they can get the notice of their parents. But a lot of the invisible child's energy can go into say, hey, here I am, look at me. A child isn't sophisticated enough to say, well, I'm lucky, I've dodged sort of the bullet of this parent even taking notice of me, and I can kind of do my own thing and be left alone. A child needs to be noticed. He or she needs to be wanted. He or she needs to be seen and known. And that's what a child needs. So the invisible child gets lost in that shuffle. As adults, this is a really difficult dynamic because spending a whole childhood being invisible often means that in adulthood, all you want is to be seen. So that could result in things like attention seeking, chronically feeling not good enough in relationships, choosing situations where they become rendered invisible again, being resentful about invisibility, and again, engaging in more attention-seeking behavior. But in the end, it's not a great setup for adulthood because there was never this sense of I'm more than enough, I'm valuable enough to be noticed. It's an important way we learn to regulate ourselves. So go into adulthood knowing that they are good, whole, noticeable people. In one family, you could see all three of these children, the scapegoat, the invisible child, and the golden child. Enough kids in the family, everyone's going to have a role. Now, obviously, if you have a family where there's an only child, the only child could be any one of those three things. And those of you watching, I'd love to hear you think, even if you put just in the comments, say, yep, I was the scapegoat, yep, I was the golden child. It'll be interesting to see sort of how that sorts out in your family system. Or be aware, yeah, I was the golden child and my sister was clearly the scapegoat. Because if you look at that, you'll see how those different kinds of histories affected you as adults. There's some good news to take from this, though, because I don't think all is lost. The sad legacy of these roles people may find themselves in adult relationships is that you think, well, maybe we're forever going to be estranged. My poor scapegoat sibling and how are we ever going to, I was the golden child, she was the scapegoat. How do we bridge that? You bridge that by making connections independent of your narcissistic parent. You disempower the narcissistic parent by cultivating a relationship with that sibling completely separate from them. Remember, it was the narcissistic parents who handed you those roles. And if you can get out of that light and get out of their purview, you and your siblings can reinvent yourselves as whole people, not as scapegoats or golden children or invisible, but as whole people. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to all of you who have been ordering the book. I'm glad to see it's getting out there and hope that, plus these videos, clarifies a lot of these issues. As always, please hit the bell. Please subscribe. We've got videos coming out twice a week. Thanks again.